Good morning. This is Monday, February 22nd, 2016. I am Commander Elaine DeLuey, Nurse Corps USN retired, and today we are interviewing Lieutenant Commander Claudia Hayes, Nurse Corps USN retired. Also are present Captain Barbara Beebe, Nurse Corps USN retired, and Lieutenant DJ Lavoie, Nurse Corps USNR former. We are being interviewed. You are being interviewed in San Diego, California. Lieutenant Commander Hayes served from October 1974 through December 1994, which was post-Vietnam and the Gulf War incident. Now, we can begin if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your background, like where you were born.
Sure. Well, I'm one of the few Cajun Navy officers in the Navy Nurse Corps, and probably the whole Navy. I joined when I was 27 years old. It's kind of a unique experience. I was divorced. I had a 4-year-old son, and I was one of 2 women at that time in 1974 that I know of that they allowed to join the Navy Nurse Corps with your son. And I guess we were the great experiment. So my first duty station was Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, with the Marines. You see what happened when I joined? They just asked me, well, where would you like to go? And I really wasn't smart enough to try to figure out where the good duty stations were. So I said, well, anywhere you need help. So they sent me to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and I remember while I was in officer indoctrination school, we would go to these admiral parties, and then they would all ask you, where are you going? And other people were going to San Diego and, Oakland and great places. And when I said I was going to Camp Lejeune, everybody just stopped in their tracks. So that was the beginning of it.
When were you at Newport, and how did you find that experience for officer indoctrination?
Well, that was October of '74, and that was a wonderful experience because we were already sworn in as naval officers. So we didn't have those rules and regulations that everybody else seemed to have who lived on the lower floors. And what I most remember is, for the first time in my life, I had more checks and money than I could spend. When I joined the Navy, it doubled my income, and I had been a registered nurse with a BSN for 5 years before I joined the Navy and lived paycheck to paycheck. So when I found out what I was getting paid, I said, I'm in. And I didn't know if I'd be a nurse. I didn't know if I was going to be mowing lawns or collecting garbage. I didn't care. I was tired of being poor. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I joined the Navy.
Where did you go to school? And then could you tell us a little bit more about your son in
Of
relationship?
course. Sure. I went to McNeese State. It was college back then. Now it's university. And I got my BSN and worked at St. Patrick's Hospital there in ICU and CCU, which was unusual because back then in '70, there were very few hospitals that had ICUs or CCUs, so that was a great experience. And I did a lot of psych. And then when I got divorced, I said, I've got to figure out what I'm going to do with our lives. And so I called the different branches, and what's interesting is when I called the Air Force, I think the recruiters must have been out to lunch because some young man said, oh, we don't need nurses, and hung up. And I decided, well, I really didn't like the Army uniforms, and they were landlocked. So I said, let me try the Navy. And Lordy, you would have think I was the second coming of Christ when Joe Swallow, the recruiter, snatched me up.
Yes.
And that's how I got to know Elaine originally. They knew each other. And that was it. I went to New Orleans. I went through the physical and passed everything, and I joined.
And how did they handle the fact that you had a son?
There was You see, I didn't know the history of it. I didn't know that prior to that you couldn't be a single woman with a child. So I found that out later. And they were just glad to have me. And I was, like I say, they told me what the paychecks were going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. After Camp Lejeune and on, I'm going to be jumping a little bit. I know you got some special certifications in regard to special jobs you had as your years piled up in the Navy.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us about that?
Well, I had national certification in ambulatory nursing, and then I did receive my national certification as a quality assurance professional, which was pretty tough to do at the time. So those were the two big ones.
When was that? When was that?
Oh gosh, when was that? The ambulatory nursing one was when I was at Balboa Hospital, so that would have been, if I can refer to my notes.
Sure, please do.
So while I was in the Navy, I obtained two national certifications. One is in ambulatory nursing around 1984, 85 time period. And then when I went to Guam the second time, unexpectedly, they made me the QI officer with very little training or knowledge of the job. They did send me to Washington, and in that group were all the QA coordinators. And I believe out of probably 80 people, I was the only one who was awake, because I was the only one who didn't know anything about this job. But that's what I loved about the Navy Nurse Corps. You never were bored. They'll put you in jobs and say you're in charge, and you learn and you figure it out. And it's never boring, it's always challenging. So I did very well with that. I ended up getting the Meritorious Service Award because of my work in QI and helping the various two commands get through their Joint Commission surveys.
Is there anything, other than these great certifications, are there little tidbits of your nursing experience in general, on a personal basis, maybe with how you dealt with corpsmen or doctors, or the locations in regard to your pleasure to be there? Like Guam, for instance, you were there twice.
Yes, I was there twice. What I found is I was, obviously, most of us weren't used to working with corpsmen. We were, if we were nurses before we joined the Navy, worked with people with various certifications, like licensed vocational nurses or registered nurses. You had aides, but when I met the corpsmen, I was so impressed, because they really worked even at a higher level than the licensed vocational nurses. And I was so invigorated by their enthusiasm. They always carried what I called their minor brain surgery kits. You could tell they were new to medicine and so gung-ho that no matter what happened, they had a piece of equipment to save lives. And just that enthusiasm made it fun to go to work. So
That sounds like it might have been one of your more memorable experiences, the pleasure of that.
Of course.
And what would you consider maybe the hardest or the most challenging, beyond what you already told us very nicely about going to QA school?
The most challenging.
Were you, when were you, before we get into that, when were you in Guam? To tell the dates of Guam.
I was in Guam the first time from 1978 to 1980, and then 1990 to 1992. Shortly after, I joined and I was sent to Camp Lejeune, and I did not complete my full tour because they needed nurses in Guam. Mm-hmm. And so they sent me to Guam, and I loved it. And my son, who was like 5 or 6 at the time, he's really enjoyed this experience. I talked to him about it today. He's an adult man now, but he said he was you often wonder, did you do an injustice to your child by doing this or that or choosing to do this career or whatever? And he said no, he really loved it. He loved the moving all over the country and going to Guam and meeting different people. And I think that's really helped him be the kind, generous, non-prejudicial man that he is. So, no, I think it all was a grand experience, and I loved Guam. Loved it.
What did you do there?
Well, what did I do there? The first time I went in as a staff nurse, but it's not bragging, but to say I was only there a few months when they made me charge nurse. I was always made the charge nurse because I had 5 years of experience.
Did you come in as a lieutenant?
I came in as a lieutenant JG because of the bachelor's, and because of my experience in ICU and CCU. I was years beyond ensigns. And so generally, once they see I wasn't killing people, they would promote me to charge nurse.
So what
And
ward did
what
you
I
work
did
on?
is I worked on the med surge. It was kind of a big combined ward. It was a huge open ward with the worst equipment, the most basic of any kind of supplies. But it was a grand time, and we did, I think, really well by our patients. The second time around, we were still in the old hospital. The new Guam hospital hadn't been built, and not too much had changed. And at that time, the second time, because I'd done so much ambulatory nursing and supervision, I was in charge of ambulatory clinics. And then our QI officer, I was only there maybe 6 months, and the QI officer got early orders, and they had no one. So they picked me for some obscure reason, and I loved that job. I loved reporting to the commanding officer. Can you imagine how much fun that is, to skip all those layers in between?
Were you there throughout any typhoons? Did you have
Oh,
a
many.
typhoon
We had-
protocol?
Yes, we had typhoons all the time, and what's interesting when you have a child, and he was still young by then, is all you have to do is make sure you have enough babysitters. It's not hard. I don't know why people think having a child is such a burden. As long as you have some money to pay babysitters, and the Navy gave me the money, there was no problems. And yes, and many times you're called into the hospital, and you spend 3 days at the hospital. It only happened twice for me in those 2 tours. The other times I just happened to be off duty, and I was in base housing, and we went through those typhoons, but they were horrific.
When you were called to the hospital, where was your son?
With various babysitters.
Babysitters. You didn't
That's
bring him
right.
with you.
Oh, no, you couldn't bring, I'd never even thought to ask. No, I wouldn't have brought him to the hospital.
Did you lived in quarters, or did you live in town?
I did. I lived in quarters.
Where?
Ganya Heights, it was called. It was on the south end of the island, near the big Navy base. We got housing there. And in fact, my first duty station was as I said, at Camp Lejeune. And when I went there, there was no officers' quarters available for me and my son, housing. And I remember, because he was with my mother in Louisiana while I'm getting settled, and I'm in the housing office, and I'm talking to the lady and finding out that I can't get my son right away because I don't have housing. And I started to tear up, and I think it scared her so much, and she wanted to be helpful, that I did get housing, but it was considered substandard for officers because it was in the enlisted section, which I could care less. I just wanted to have my son there. But on the positive side, while it wasn't so gloriously beautiful, I got money back because it was substandard, and I'm all about the money.
Absolutely.
So
that's kind of a nice, funny experience, a very pleasant one, actually, there in the end. Could you relay a strange experience? That's kind of wide open there, but...
no, I can't think of anything off of the top of my head.
So after Guam, where did you go next?
After Guam, I went to Camp Pendleton. That's what I went to Camp Pendleton. I think my son was 10 or 11 at that time. And we did get officer housing at that time. And I really enjoyed the Pendleton experience. And I was, my experience there was just charge nurse of ortho. And then they asked me to be charge nurse of the recovery room, which I had not a clue, another job, but you buy a book, you talk to the nurses and doctors who work there, and you figure it out very quickly. And that's, as I said before, the fun of it. So that's mainly what I did while I was there. And then I received orders at my request down to San Diego. And the Navy was very good about trying to do my orders during the summer vacation so I could get my son in school without taking him out of school and put in school. So I really appreciated that.
And you came to Balboa?
And I came to Balboa, where I was for almost 8 years, which is a long time. And then I married for the second time while there, and my son was in college by that time, and I asked for Guam. And I'll tell you a little story. You can edit it out if you like. But I asked for orders to Guam because if you don't get your male child out of the house, they may still be there when they're 40 or 50 years old. So I knew that he would not be motivated unless he was on his own to make his own decisions. So I asked for orders to Guam, sold the house, gave him a big kiss and said, "You're on your own, son," and went to Guam, and he figured it out. He's a very successful man, a very successful, good, well-adjusted man.
What was your husband in the service?
He was retired from the Navy, and he came to Guam with me, and we had base housing there, but unfortunately that only lasted about 5 years, and I divorced and am steadfastly single.
And how have you found your retirement thus far? What
Well,
have you done since retirement?
I found that retirement was not that difficult. I don't think retirement is that hard for women. We find other things to do. And I was still married at the time when I was retired, and retired to Ohio, and got a job as an assistant chief nurse at a local rural hospital. And that was more of an experience than anything that I'd been through in the Navy, is when you go to these very rural areas. But I enjoyed doing that. I was assistant chief nurse, and I liked my chief nurse, and I probably would still be there or somewhere in that area had I not divorced. And then I moved back. Once I did that, I got divorced. I moved back to California, where my heart has always been, because I love San Diego.
And your position working in San Diego as a retiree?
Oh, yeah. When I was retired, I did mostly per diem. I did case management at Alvarado, and I did home health and hospice through Sharp as per diem. So that was like 3, 4, as much as you wanted to work, they always needed you. And I really enjoyed that. It was a new experience, a new learning experience, and then I decided, well, Claudia, since you're never going to make enough money to move to Coronado and buy a house, why don't you just quit and enjoy your life with your Navy retirement and other investments? And that's what I did. So I had bought a house in La Mesa, and now I'm in a big condo downtown San Diego. All mainly because of my tenaciousness and the Navy.
If you had it to do all over again, would you still join the Navy?
I would still do it, but I would do it the way I did it this way. I would not want to go in as an ensign, inexperienced. I'm glad I did it as a more mature woman. And no, I would certainly do it again. And I've encouraged just about everybody I meet to join the Navy. I don't know if anybody has, but I'm certainly an advocate for it.
What reactions did you get from people in regard to the military initially when you were joining? And
I thought about that question because I think because I was 27, married, with a child, I didn't really ask anybody their opinions. And once you get to know me, you don't generally tell me your opinions if you think it disagrees with my opinion. So I think everybody was thrilled that I was doing something different.
How about your family? Had they
Well,
had any
my-
military experience?
You know, I had one uncle who was in World War II, and I think he had PTSD and never talked about it. But no one had graduated from college on either side, and except for him, no one had been in the military. And I don't think, when I think about it, there was not one professional woman on either side until I went to college and became a registered nurse. So I think they felt she must know what she's doing. She's doing pretty good so far. And so, no, they were all happy for me, no negativity at all. And when I got out, too, I think people are thrilled to learn you were a Navy nurse. They're always very interested in your experience, and so no, it's been a grand life.
I was interested to hear when you joined the Navy, you had already been in nursing for 5 years.
That's right.
And then you went to Camp Lejeune, and the adjustment, if there was an adjustment, what you did that was different.
Well, there was an adjustment. And I say this with respect, but the nurses who were my supervisors, it was like working with a bunch of nuns. None of them had been married, because they couldn't be. None of them had children. It was a very kind of cloistered life, it seemed to me. And so I think it was a bit of a shock. And I don't know how well I was accepted initially. But they kept me in. And
Where did you work at Camp Lejeune?
at Camp Lejeune, I started in the ICU. And I was there probably almost a year, and then they put me in charge of a huge ward. And then that's when I received orders. I may have gotten one of the duty stations mixed up. After Lejeune, I received early orders to help open the hospital in New Orleans, Louisiana, which was a big boondoggle, and it was on 60 Minutes. Because it was a big boondoggle. And, we had a full staff of nurses and doctors, and maybe at the height, we might have had 20 patients throughout the entire hospital. So that's when I received another set of earlier orders out to Guam the first time.
When you were at Lejeune, was the style, the type of things you were doing in nursing, was it similar to what you had done in civilian work?
Yes, it was. I do remember, though, early on, I was in the dirty utility room scrubbing bedpans, thinking, with the education and experience I have, why am I doing this? But then I've learned, you do whatever needs to be done whenever it needs to be done. And I do remember that quite vividly. But, and of course you have to get used to the Navy way of doing things, but all of us had to get used to that. I liked the structure of it. It was not that different than being in civilian nursing.
How about dealing with the Marines at Camp Lejeune?
Oh my gosh, you might want to edit this. I was a single woman who had been divorced. So I looked at that as like Disneyland. There were all these gorgeous Marine Corps officers and a wonderful officers club. I had the best time of my life. There were so few of us that no matter what you looked like, you were the queen of the officers club. And I had my friend Sue Mastrog was the only other nurse that they allowed in with 2 sons. And she and I, because we'd been around the block, we went out and partied. Whereas a lot of the Navy nurses just didn't do that. And that was way back in 1974, 76. So I loved the Marines, and I loved and I still do love their attitude. Their can do, I'll do anything that needs to be done attitude. They were so proud. They never complained. Yeah, love the Marine Corps.
Did you ever have Marines when you were on the wards that were in the charge disciplinarian? What did they call them?
Rehabilitation?
No,
Prisoners.
no, no, no. But then master sergeants or something like that that would kind of control the units.
You know,
Oh.
no.
No, you never did.
I never really saw that. Maybe because they were so ill, you know. And we did have an officers' ward, so I never had officers on. I had enlisted wards, and no, I don't. I've never
Master
seen
at
that.
Arms?
Pardon?
Sometimes.
We had
I'm
Master
certain-
of Arms. I don't recall though that. I really don't recall a Master of Arms. Maybe that was before my time.
Yes.
No, I think it was an easy bunch. They were just so bless their hearts, those young enlisted guys. Oh, I do have a kind of interesting story. I had an enlisted guy who was off of a submarine. He had appendicitis, and so after it was all over, he invited the staff, if any time we wanted to go by the submarine, we could go visit. So this submarine, and I forgot the name of it, it was the submarine that hit the Russian sub way back when, and they surfaced and they exchanged champagne. So it was not an incident that would have caused problems. And that was the sub I toured. And the story goes, my girlfriend, Sue Mastrog, and I were out partying, and it's about 2 a.m, and we decide, let's go visit the sub. We have an invite, and literally, there's no security. We banged on the door to the sub, which is, elevated. And somebody answers the door and wakes up the commanding officer, who was thrilled to have 2 Navy nurses on board, who woke up that enlisted guy who had the appendicitis, and we sat there and we had beverages and talked, and then we left.
Where was this?
This was in Guam. Yes.
Oh, in Guam.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, Guam.
Yeah, lots of things that happen everywhere, but I've certainly had a good time. I feel sorry for civilians.
Did you deal with any patients that had war injuries or wounds, or were you were after Vietnam? But
I was after Vietnam, but during the Gulf War,
Gulf War.
and we did have medevaced some patients from the Gulf War, but
this is in San Diego.
This is no. This is in Guam.
On Guam. Oh.
This is while I was in Guam the second time. Yeah, they medevaced them in, but they weren't horrendously maimed. I don't know, probably there was a closer place to the Gulf War where those particular patients went, but they were just our general medicine and, generally speaking, troops who needed surgery or further surgery.
Did you get to travel very much when you were overseas in Guam?
I did, but not as much as maybe many other people would. I've never been a big, I hate being on a plane for more than about 4 hours. So even just going from Guam to Okinawa seemed like it took days to visit a friend there, a Navy nurse that I had. So I did get to see Okinawa, but I really didn't travel much because I did not like I still to this day don't like to be on planes forever. And since those were the days where you never took drugs unless they were prescribed, you were fully alert for these 9-hour flights. And, the flight from the States to Guam was incredible for me and my son. But anyway, I got through that. So no, I didn't travel that much. I have traveled a lot in the States, but not so much overseas. I kind of regret that, but...
And when you were on Guam with your son, did you interact with the Guamanian, the communities?
Quite a bit. See, my sister lived on Guam, Well, the first time around, the first time in 76, when I'm in Guam, my sister gets divorced on the bayou and comes to visit me. Now, that was a story in itself because she hadn't traveled very much, but there she is all the way, this Cajun, all the way from the bayous of Louisiana to Guam. And so she lived with me for a while and then got her own place. She ended up staying there 15 years. Wow. She ended up getting her bachelor's in accounting, opening her own business, accounting business, buying her own home. Her boyfriend was the editor of the local newspaper, and I knew I met him for my first time around. So through her and him, I got to meet a lot of the politicians, a lot of the movers and shakers on Guam, especially the second time around, because she'd been there so long and knew so many people. And my son was in school, so I interacted with a lot of the teachers, the things that go on in your child's life at school, the locals. Yeah, had a grand time.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Very neat.
What about cooking? The Guamanian food? Have you had?
Oh,
any
I'd go to
favorites
their,
there?
oh yeah, I went to their fiestas. I don't cook it. I think it's rather complicated, but oh yeah, love the food, love their sense of family and having a good time. They just have a good old time when they...
Is your sister still there?
No, she came back. She met a contractor from Arizona who was on Guam building one of those Japanese hotels, those 4- and 5-star hotels. And they met, and so they married and moved back to Arizona. So she's in Arizona now, and we often get together in Arizona. So for 2 little Cajun girls, we kind of had an interesting life.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. Good.
Well, we thank you for this interview. It's been a pleasure, and you certainly are wonderfully entertaining.
Oh, well, thank you.
And
I had a wonderful time.
It will add a lot to our history, and we thank you for your service and wish you Godspeed ahead.
Well, thank you very much. It was fun doing this.
Great.